Hi guys, this video is for general guidance only. It's based on my personal and professional opinion. I'm going to be using a publicly available listing as a real life example to walk through some of the key points, including like the layout, the monthly cost, the deposit contributions, and also the questions I would ask before even thinking about reserving. Like to point out that I'm not affiliated with the developer or housing provider, and this is not financial advice. Always do your own research or speak to an independent advisor before making a decision. So, £110,000 for a 2-bedroom flat in London. Sounds like a bargain, right? But let's break it down, because this is a shared ownership, new build in Croydon, and there's a lot more going on behind that headline. This specific flat is in Crescent Gardens on Cherry Orchard Road. It's plot 303, flat 53, and it's on the 3rd floor. Now, how do I know this? I didn't just pluck it off thin air. It's actually stated, if you scroll down, it is stated on the price list and also the brochure, so where it says property downloads, but we'll look at that later on. Let's go back. So they're offering a 25% share for £110,000 with a full market value of £440,000. The minimum deposit is listed as £5,500. So you're not buying a full property, you're buying a quarter of it. The rest is owned by the housing provider and you'll pay rent on their share. Now, the rent is based on 2.75% of the unsold share. So in this case, as we've just stated, it will be the 75% the housing provider still owns. So I always start with the floor plan because I think it tells you more than the photos ever will. Let's go to it. The floor plan is showing 678 square feet. That's a decent size, I think. Say that's a decent size. I mean, a typical new build 2-bed is between 650 to 750 square feet. I feel like if it's under maybe 600 square feet, then yeah, you're really going to feel the squeeze is going to be, it'll be quite tight. And if it's over 700, then that's where you get some breathing room. That includes an open plan living, kitchen / dining area, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, it's not an ensuite, and a balcony off the living room. There's also a few angled corners which can make some furniture layouts tricky. It's quite angled. Anyway, then we go to the back to the listing and we look at some of the photos. We can see that, it's showing clean lines, stage furniture, might CGI's in there, who knows. Soft lighting, it all looks nice, all looks great. I'm going to take any of this with us, but either way, it's fine. But here's what I always ask. What are you actually walking into? So let's look back at the floor plan, shall we? Let's zoom in. So you've got bedroom 2, slightly angled. So my thought process is, can you fit a wardrobe in there? Or maybe a desk? Let's say you're working from home. I can see there's a utility cupboard. I'm not sure the dimensions. Is that going to be a problem if you have a buggy or a Hoover? Then we have an open plan, lovely open plan, which means no separation. So you'll see your kitchen from your sofa 24/7. The balcony also looks quite small to me. So I'm thinking, will it actually fit a chair or is it just decorative? Now, the marketing photos won't tell you this, only the plan will. And at the same time, it's always best to ask. If you have any queries, ask, and then you'll be able to get the right answers. Now, this is something hardly anyone asks, but it does make a huge difference in my opinion. Which way does the flat face? Now, as you can see from the photos, it might be difficult to pinpoint which way. And even if you think you're right, it's always best to check. Why do I think it matters? So let's go through it. South facing is usually the most natural light. East facing is bright mornings, but then quite dim evenings. And then you have west facing, which are like darker mornings and then the sunset light later on. And then you have north facing. So it's more consistent, but then there's less warm sunlight. So let's say you work from home and you love bright spaces, or you have plants. This can affect your whole day. You may not be allowed to view the flat before exchange. So I would always advise to ask up front. Always ask up front. Let's now look at the actual monthly cost for flat 50. So obviously we have it here where you can obviously change the calculations, but then we also have the official price list that I did speak about earlier on. I touched quite briefly on. So let's click on that. So you can see it here. Sorry, it's quite small. So what we have here is the official price list. Here we can also see that the rent is £756.25. You've got a service charge of £189.98, and you've got a mortgage on 110k at 5% at around £613. Yeah, fantastic. So the total we have here would be £1,559 a month, which was stated if I scroll back up here as well. So while the purchase price is low, the monthly cost isn't far off what many pay in private rent. Now you'll see a banner and it's saying up to £6,000 deposit contribution when you reserve, with a little asterisk next to it. Here's what the asterisk is now stating. I'll scroll down so we can read it together. So it says, terms and conditions apply. Value of incentive is up to 5% of 25% property share value. Payable on completion, no cash alternative is available, and please speak to sales advisor for full details. So long story short, it's not cash in your pocket. It's up to 5% of the 25% share value. So on the £110,000, that's the maximum of the £5,500. There's no guarantee you'll get the full amount. It depends on the plot, the availability, and qualification. And also, it may affect your mortgage application. So here's what you should ask the sales advisor. Is the full 5% incentive available to me at this price? Will this reduce my deposit or go towards fees? Does this affect my mortgage application? Is the contribution applied automatically, or do I need to request it? And my favorite question out of all of them is, are there any conditions tied to receiving this contribution, like using a panel solicitor? These are the kind of questions that I feel protect you from surprise costs or also disappointment down the line. Here's a checklist of questions that I'd bring to the sales team and also why each one matters. But before I start that, I also want to state that I will be going back to the checklist and looking at the small fine print at the bottom as well with you. First question, how long is the lease? New builds generally should have a 990-year lease now, but a shorter lease can lower resale value and affect your ability to get a mortgage. So good to ask. Can I staircase later? And are there any fees or limits? Because as you know, some providers will charge admin fees or limit how often you can buy more shares. So important. What does the service charge cover? Remember, the service charge was given to us, which I stated, and how often does it increase? Because this can affect your monthly costs. Which way does the flat face? How much light will I get? What is the parking situation? Because when you scroll down, obviously we have a summary, we have a description, a lovely description, and we have a bit that talks about parking permits available for selected 2-bedroom apartments subject to availability and separate agreement or negotiation. So highly advisable to ask if there's any form of parking included with this particular listing. And if not, what are the costs? Do I have to use a specific solicitor or broker? Because some providers push panel solicitors, and you can usually choose your own, but they might have incentives that are also tied to it as well. So really think about who you'd want to use. When I resell, do I have to go through the housing provider? Because most shared ownership properties require the provider to resell your home first. Good to ask that question. Now, is the deposit contribution still available? I have said that before, and how will it be applied? Such a good question to ask, because you want to know. You want to know exactly whether it will confirm a lower deposit. That's very important. Another question is, when is the anticipated handover or moving date likely to take place? You need to plan for a lot of things, for removals, storage, notice periods. And the thing about new builds is that they are often facing delays. Is this the first phase, or is this part of a larger development? It's good to know. Early phases may mean building noise and unfinished surroundings. They generally are cheaper as well. But later phases might be more settled. So you want to know what's happening. What's the EPC rating for the flat? Obviously, a good rating means lower bills and a better comfort year round. And so now I would also go back to looking at the price list again. And as you can see in the shared ownership price list, when we zoom in, there's a few hidden prints here. Well, they're not really hidden, but they're smaller. So reservations are subject to a £350 reservation deposit. That's not the cost. Another thing you need to also know is that, care has been taken to ensure the accuracy of all information given. But the contents of the price list do not form part of or constitute a representation, warranty, or part of any contract. The above price examples are valid as of May 2025. So obviously these are based on valuation carried out by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, but these valuations are reviewed at least every 3 months. Service charges are estimates, and they can change before and or after completion. So remember that because it's very valid. Parking is on a private permit basis and at an additional cost. So please refer to the sales executive for further details. Now, please, I'm honestly begging you guys, please make sure that you ask all the questions. No matter how silly you may think these questions are, please ask them. As you can see in the material information section, a lot of these things say inquire with provider. So please do ask. It's always best to be certain than to not be certain. Please do ask. Now, another thing I wanted to touch up on is quite a lot of first-time buyers are not aware that you don't always get to choose your share. So what does that mean? It means even though the listing shows a 25% share starting from £110,000, you won't always be able to pick that. So housing providers are required to assess what share you can afford based on your income, expenses, and your financial situation. So that means if you can afford 35% or 40%, they may insist you buy that higher share. It's not just about picking the cheapest share. It's based on Homes England affordability rules. So always ask, what's the maximum share I would be expected to buy? What share is my mortgage advisor and housing provider recommending? All these things, this affects everything. It affects your deposit, it affects your mortgage, it affects your monthly rent. And so please make sure you do ask. I keep saying this because, I strongly, believe in this, and I strongly recommend that all first-time buyers, please do ask. So let's quickly touch on stamp duty, because shared ownership has its own set of rules. If you're a first-time buyer and the full market value of the home is £500,000 or less, you may be eligible for what is called a stamp duty relief on both the share you're buying and also the rent portion. That applies whether you choose to pay stamp duty upfront on the full value, which is called a market value election, or only on your share now. So in this case, the Croydon flat has a full value of £440,000, which falls within that threshold. But, and this is important, your solicitor will need to confirm exactly what applies in your situation, because relief depends on your eligibility as a first-time buyer, how the purchase is structured, and whether any staircasing happens later. So don't assume you won't pay stamp duty. Make sure your solicitor checks and confirms everything clearly for you in writing. My honest take, shared ownership can work, but only if you go in with your eyes wide open. This listing at Crescent Gardens looks affordable, but between rent, mortgage, service charge, restrictions, and unknowns like natural light and layout, it's not simple. That's why I created the Shared Ownership Toolkit, your trusted guide, because I want you guys to buy smarter, I want you guys to move sooner, and I would say grab yours now at FirstHomeMadeSimple.co.uk.